The rain was beating down mercilessly on the streets of Pine Creek, a small town in Colorado that hadn't seen such an intense storm in a long time. Robert Mitchell watched the droplets running down the window of his mansion, isolated on top of the hill, his gaze lost in the gray horizon. At 45, the businessman had built an empire in real estate, but lived like a ghost in his own existence. "Sir, dinner is served," announced Gerald, the butler who had accompanied him for 2 decades. Robert merely nodded without taking his eyes off the window. He was accustomed to solitude. He preferred it that way. People meant complications, meant attachments, meant pain when they left. And he knew that pain well. "I'm going out," he said abruptly, grabbing his car keys. "But sir, the storm is—" "No," Robert cut him off, already taking his coat. "I need some air." The black Jaguar cut through the flooded streets with no particular destination. Robert drove mechanically, as he did every night when insomnia tormented him. That's when, passing by the town square, his eyes caught something unusual. A small figure sitting on a bench, completely soaked. Robert slowed down. Not my problem, he thought, accelerating again. But something made him brake suddenly a few meters ahead. He looked in the rearview mirror. It was a child. Cursing himself for his curiosity, Robert reversed and parked near the square. He opened his umbrella and approached cautiously. "Hey, what are you doing out here in this rain?" he asked, keeping his distance. The girl raised her face. She was about 10 years old with soaked brown hair framing a pale face. Her eyes, however, had a disconcerting brightness. "I'm waiting," she answered simply. "Waiting for what? Someone?" "I don't know exactly," she shrugged. "Just waiting." Robert looked around. No adult in sight. The rain was getting worse. "Where are your parents?" The girl averted her gaze. "I don't have parents. I live at Hope Shelter, but today I couldn't get back in time." Something in her voice, in the way she spoke, so adult, so resigned, deeply bothered Robert. "What's your name?" "Sophia." "Well, Sophia, you can't stay here. You're freezing." The girl coughed, a worrying sound that seemed to come from deep in her chest. "Are you sick?" Robert asked, moving closer. That's when he noticed how pale she was. And thin. Terribly thin. "Just a cold." Sophia tried to smile, but another coughing fit interrupted her. Robert hesitated. He didn't get involved with strangers. It was a personal rule he hadn't broken for years. But the rain was falling mercilessly, and something about that child, something inexplicable, prevented him from simply walking away. "Come on," he said finally, extending his hand. "I'll take you to the hospital." Sophia stared at his outstretched hand suspiciously. "I don't need a hospital. I just need to get back to the shelter tomorrow morning." "Don't be stubborn, you're obviously sick." The girl stood up with difficulty but refused his hand. "I can walk by myself." Robert watched Sophia walking toward the car, her steps faltering, her bony shoulders visible beneath her wet t-shirt. As he opened the passenger door, a strange sensation invaded him. An uneasiness, as if something important was happening. As if that casual encounter in the rain was no coincidence at all. "Why are you helping me?" Sophia asked once inside the car, staring at him with her large, inquisitive eyes. Robert started the engine before answering. "Honestly, I have no idea." Pine Creek Memorial Hospital never seemed as intimidating to Robert as it did that night. The white corridors, the smell of disinfectant, the fluorescent lights, everything transported him to memories he struggled daily to forget. Sitting in the waiting room, he observed the movement of doctors and nurses while Sophia was being treated. "Mr. Mitchell," the doctor's voice pulled him from his trance. "I'm Dr. Louise Carter." Robert stood up, tense. "How is she?" "We need to talk about the girl. Could you come with me?" He followed the doctor to a small meeting room. From the serious expression on Dr. Carter's face, something wasn't right. "Are you related to her?" asked Dr. Louise, sitting down. "No. I found her in the square, alone in the rain. She mentioned living in a shelter." The doctor nodded, making notes. "Hope Shelter. I know it well." She adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Mitchell, Sophia doesn't have a simple cold. In fact, she's been our patient for several months now. Robert frowned. What do you mean? Sophia has leukemia. She's been in treatment with us, but it's been complicated. The word fell like a weight on Robert. Leukemia, a 10-year-old child. She ran away from the shelter today. It's not the first time, continued the doctor. Sophia has difficulty accepting the limitations of her treatment, and those responsible social workers. The system is overwhelmed. Sophia is just one among dozens of children in the shelter. The doctor sighed. Unfortunately, cases like hers rarely receive the necessary attention. Robert felt a wave of outrage. How could a sick child be so helpless? What's the prognosis? He asked, surprising himself with his own interest. She needs intensive treatment, advanced chemotherapy, possibly a bone marrow transplant. Without that, Dr. Louise left the sentence hanging. And why isn't she receiving this treatment? Limited resources, Mr. Mitchell. The public health system does what it can, but cases like hers. How much would it cost? The question caught the doctor by surprise. Pardon me? The complete treatment, how much does it cost? Dr. Louise stared at him, confused. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. Robert nodded, determined. I want to pay for her treatment, the best possible. Mr. Mitchell, that's very noble, but what? It's a matter of money, isn't it? I have money. It's not that simple. There are legal issues, bureaucratic ones. You have no relation to the girl. Then what do you suggest? That I let her disappear into the system? The doctor adjusted her glasses again, studying Robert with curiosity. Why do you care so much? You just met her. Robert had no answer, not for the doctor, not for himself. Can I see her? Of course, but she'll probably be sleeping. We gave her mild sedatives. In the room, Sophia seemed even smaller in the hospital bed. The paleness of her skin contrasted with the white sheets. Robert approached cautiously, as if afraid of waking her. She wakes up and sleeps a lot during the day, said a nurse who was checking the IV. Effect of the medication and the disease itself. Has she always been alone? Asked Robert. Since she started treatment, some volunteers from the hospital visit her, but the nurse left the room and Robert remained there, watching Sophia's rhythmic breathing. For some incomprehensible reason, he couldn't leave. Hours later, when the first rays of sunlight began to illuminate the room, Sophia opened her eyes. She seemed confused for a moment, until her gaze found Robert sitting in an armchair in the corner. You're still here, she said, surprised. I promised I'd help you, didn't I? Sophia adjusted herself in bed, assessing Robert with a disconcerting maturity for her age. Why? You already asked me that question. And you didn't answer. Robert smiled for the first time in a long time. What do you say we eat something? Afterward, I promised to try to answer. Sophia seemed to consider the proposal. Can I order pancakes with chocolate syrup? Pancakes at 7 in the morning? If I have to stay in this hospital again, at least I want pancakes. Robert laughed, surprising himself. Pancakes it is. Then and afterward we'll talk. The girl nodded, serious. I'll like having someone to talk to. The people here only talk about medicine and treatments. Nobody ever asks what I think. Unfortunately, it's not possible, Mr. Mitchell. The hospital director, Dr. Arnold, maintained an impassive expression as he leafed through the documents on his desk. There are protocols to be followed. You have no legal connection to the minor. Robert breathed deeply, controlling his frustration. It had been 3 days since he'd found Sophia, and he'd spent them almost entirely in the hospital, between attempts to resolve the bureaucracy and visits to the girl's room. We're talking about an abandoned child who needs urgent treatment. I'm willing to cover all the costs. What's the problem? The problem, Mr. Mitchell, is that we cannot simply accept private funding for a public system patient without the proper legal authorizations. Besides, the Child Protection Services needs to approve any decision related to the minor. And how long will that take? Sophia doesn't have that time. The director sighed, closing the folder. I understand your concern, but there are procedures. Robert left the office feeling the weight of powerlessness. He who commanded a corporate empire, who was used to solving any problem with a phone call or signature, now found himself blocked by bureaucracy. In the hallway, he met Dr. Louise, who seemed to be waiting for him. "It didn't go well, I imagine," she commented. "How is Sophia today?" "Stable. The results of the new tests arrived." She hesitated. "The situation is delicate, Mr. Mitchell. The conventional treatment is not being as effective as we hoped." Robert ran his hand through his graying hair, feeling suddenly exhausted. "There must be something we can do. There's an experimental protocol in Denver. New medications, a more aggressive approach, but too expensive for the public system," Robert completed. The doctor nodded, "and completely out of reach for a child from the shelter. Unless someone pays and manages to get through all the bureaucracy," she corrected. Robert reflected for a moment. "I need to make a call." 20 minutes later, he met the doctor again in the hospital cafeteria. "James Fields will meet us here in an hour," he announced, sitting down with a cup of coffee. "The lawyer?" Dr. Louise seemed surprised. "The best in the state. If there's a legal way to expedite this, he'll find it." The doctor studied Robert for a few moments. "May I ask you something personal?" Robert made a gesture of agreement. "Why are you doing all this for a stranger? Most people would have just called an ambulance and left." Robert observed the dark liquid in his cup, as if the answer might be there. "I don't fully understand it myself," he admitted. "Something about her affects me in a way I can't explain. Sophia has that effect on people. Despite everything she's been through, she maintains a light, a hope. It's admirable. She seems very mature for her age. Children who face serious illnesses often develop a different understanding of life." The doctor paused. "Do you have children?" The question hit Robert like a punch to the stomach. He swallowed hard before answering. "No, I never had that opportunity." Before the conversation could continue, a nurse approached hurriedly. "Doctor, it's Sophia. She's having a crisis." The two ran to the girl's room. Sophia was sitting on the bed, hugging her knees, her face red and wet with tears, while a nurse tried to calm her down. "I don't want any more," Sophia shouted. "I'm tired. I want to leave." Dr. Louise approached calmly. "Sophia, we need you to calm down. Your blood pressure?" "I don't care," the girl sobbed. "Nobody really cares. Everyone leaves." Robert felt as if something broke inside him, seeing the child's despair. He slowly approached the bed. "Sophia," he called in a low voice. "I'm here." The girl stared at him, her eyes red and teary. "You'll leave too. Everyone does." "No, I won't," said Robert, surprising himself with the firmness of the promise. "You're lying," she accused. "Adults always lie." Robert sat on the edge of the bed and hesitantly took her small hands in his. "Sophia, look at me. I promise I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay here with you for as long as necessary." The girl studied him for a long moment, as if trying to detect any sign of falsehood. "Why?" she asked again, her voice calmer, though still trembling. Robert took a deep breath. This would be the third time she had asked that question, and this time he realized he had an answer. Because everyone deserves someone who stays. Sophia said nothing, but her shoulders visibly relaxed. Slowly, to the surprise of everyone in the room, she moved closer and rested her head on Robert's shoulder. "Everything hurts," she murmured. "I'm so tired." Robert felt a lump in his throat. I know, he responded softly. "But you're not alone now." Robert's mansion, previously a refuge of silence, had been transformed. One of the guest rooms close to his had been completely renovated in less than a week. Walls once beige gained a soft aqua-green tone. New furniture arrived, and a bookshelf full of children's books and games now occupied an entire wall. "Do you really think you'll get temporary custody?" asked Gerald, while supervising the installation of a smart TV. "James is the best lawyer I know, and I have contacts in the judiciary," replied Robert, critically examining the room. "Something's missing." "A plant, perhaps? Something alive." suggested the butler. Robert nodded, thoughtful. Not just a plant, an aquarium. Sophia mentioned she always wanted to have fish. In the 2 weeks that had passed since the encounter in the square, Robert had visited Sophia daily. He brought books, games, and spent hours talking with her. Gradually, the girl was beginning to lower her defenses. Robert's phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. "James, any news?" "Good news, Robert. The judge granted temporary custody. The social workers praised your commitment, and Dr. Louise's medical report was essential. The decision was expedited due to the girl's health condition." Robert felt profound relief. "And the treatment?" "Also approved. The judge agreed that the experimental treatment is the girl's best chance. You have authorization to transfer her to the clinic in Denver as soon as the documentation is in order." When Robert arrived at the hospital that afternoon, he found Sophia sitting on the bed, leafing through one of the books he had brought. "Robert," she smiled upon seeing him, something that was still rare. "I thought you'd only come later." "I have news," he said, sitting in the chair next to the bed. "Good news." Sophia closed the book, suddenly serious. "About the treatment?" "Yes, but not just that." Robert took a deep breath. "The judge approved my request. You'll come to live with me while you undergo treatment." The girl's eyes widened. "And sent your house, for real?" "For real, I prepared a room just for you." Sophia remained silent for a few moments, processing the information. "You didn't have to do that," she finally said in a low voice. "You're already paying for the treatment." "I want to do this, Sophia." Robert hesitated before continuing. "For a long time I lived alone. Maybe we both need some company." The girl stared at him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see through him. "Why do you live alone?" "Rich people usually have families." Robert smiled sadly. "Things aren't always as they should be." "Did you have someone before?" insisted Sophia, with the typical frankness of children. Robert felt his heart tighten. It was a question no one had asked him in years, a question he himself avoided. "Yes," he finally answered, "a long time ago." "What happened?" "That's a story for another day." Robert changed the subject. "Today, we need to focus on your hospital discharge and moving to your new home." Sophia seemed to accept the diversion, but her eyes showed that the curiosity remained. "What's your house like?" "Too big for just one person," he smiled. "It has a huge garden, a pool that nobody has used in years, and a butler named Gerald, who makes the best waffles in the world." "Waffles?" Sophia's eyes sparkled. "I've never had waffles." "Then that will be the first thing Gerald prepares for you tomorrow at breakfast." That night, after Sophia fell asleep, Robert met with Dr. Louise in the hallway. "She's excited about the move," commented the doctor. "I haven't seen her like this in a long time." "I hope I'm doing the right thing." "You're providing her with what she needs most right now, a stable home and access to the best possible treatment. And what if it's not enough?" The question escaped before Robert could contain it. Dr. Louise studied him sympathetically. "You've grown attached to her." It wasn't a question. "Is that a problem?" "Actually, I think it's exactly what Sophia needs. Someone who truly cares. But," she hesitated, "but you also need to prepare yourself. The treatment is aggressive, the prognosis is still uncertain. There will be difficult days." Robert nodded, serious. "I'm not looking for the easy path, doctor. I'm looking for the right one." As he drove back home that night, Robert tried to understand the transformation he was undergoing. 3 weeks ago, he was a man who had practically given up on human connections. Now he was renovating his house and his life to welcome a child he had met by chance. Or was it really chance? Upon entering his study, Robert opened the desk drawer and took out an old framed photograph. The photo showed a young woman with dark hair and a radiant smile. Emily, his great love, who had disappeared from his life so abruptly more than 10 years ago. "Where did you go?" he murmured to the photograph, as he had done hundreds of times before. There was never an answer. Just silence and the mystery of a love that simply vanished one day, without explanations, leaving only unanswered questions and an emptiness that Robert had never managed to fill. Until now. "Are you comfortable?" asked Robert, adjusting the pillow behind Sophia's back. The girl smiled slightly, still pale after the first session of the new treatment at the Denver clinic. "Yes, thank you. The medicines here are stronger. They make me dizzy." A month had passed since Sophia had moved into the mansion. The adaptation hadn't been easy. The girl, accustomed to the institutional environment of the shelter, initially felt out of place in the spacious and luxurious spaces. Robert, in turn, had to relearn how to share his space and his routine. "Doctor." "Helen said that's normal, your body is adjusting." Robert sat in the armchair next to the bed. "Would you like me to read another chapter of the book?" Sophia shook her head. "Can we just talk? Sometimes when you read, I notice your mind goes far away." Robert smiled, once again surprised by the girl's perceptiveness. It was true. During readings, he often found himself thinking about the similarity between Sophia's eyes and Emily's. The same shade of brown, the same expressiveness. "What do you want to talk about?" Sophia played with the edge of the sheet for a moment before answering. "You never told me about the person you lost, the one who made you stay alone." Robert felt his heart race. The girl hadn't forgotten that conversation. "It's a sad story, Sophia. All stories have sad parts. That doesn't mean we shouldn't tell them." With a sigh, Robert agreed. "Her name was Emily. We met in college and were together for 5 years. Did you love her very much?" "Yes. We planned to get married, have children." "What happened to her?" Sophia's voice was almost a whisper. Robert swallowed hard. "One day, she simply disappeared, left a note saying she needed to leave, that we couldn't be together. I never understood why I never saw her again." Sophia observed Robert with attentive eyes. "Did you look for her?" "For years. I hired detectives, searched everywhere. It was as if she had evaporated." "And you never loved anyone else?" The question, so direct, caught Robert off guard. "I think I built walls around myself after that, walls that only recently started to fall." Sophia smiled slightly, understanding the reference. "Because of me?" "Because of you," Robert returned the smile. "Now I think it's time to rest. We have another busy day tomorrow." Later that night, while Sophia slept, Robert spoke with Dr. Helen in her office at the clinic. "The results from the first sessions are promising," explained the oncologist, showing graphs on her computer. "But there's something interesting I noticed when comparing the detailed tests with her medical history. Something serious? Not necessarily, but curious." She turned the screen toward Robert. "See this specific genetic pattern? It's quite unusual." Robert observed the data without fully comprehending. "What does that mean?" "In medical terms, it can help us personalize the treatment even more, but I also noticed..." She hesitated. "Mr. Mitchell, I know this might seem strange, but have you considered taking a DNA test?" "DNA test? Why?" "It's probably nothing, but some of Sophia's genetic characteristics are so specific that it made me think, is there any possibility you're related?" Robert felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. "That's impossible, I would know." "Certainly. It was just a scientific observation." Dr. Helen closed her laptop. "In any case, we need to discuss the next cycle of treatment." The conversation continued, but Robert's mind was elsewhere. The doctor's suggestion, as absurd as it seemed, had planted a disturbing seed. Days later, Robert entered the laboratory to receive the results of the test he had taken in secret. The geneticist, Dr. Camilla, received him with a serious countenance. "Mr. Mitchell, the results are conclusive. The probability of paternity is higher than 99.9%. Robert felt dizzy, needing to lean on the table. "This can't be right. Heard some mistake. We redid the test twice. There's no doubt Sophia is your biological daughter." Robert's world collapsed. Sophia, the girl he had met by chance in the rain, the child who was fighting against a serious illness under his care, was his daughter with Emily. "How?" he murmured, more to himself than to the doctor. "Emily never told me." "Mr. Mitchell, are you feeling well?" Robert barely heard. Robert remained seated in the car parked in front of the mansion for almost an hour. The light rain falling seemed an echo of that fateful night when he had found Sophia. Now everything made sense. The inexplicable feeling of connection, the familiarity in the girl's eyes. She was his daughter, a daughter he never knew existed. When he finally gathered the courage to enter the house, he found Gerald in the living room. "Sir, I was worried. Little Sophia asked for you several times." "Is she awake?" "She fell asleep a little while ago, but asked that I notify you when you arrived. She said she had something important to show you." Robert nodded mechanically and climbed the stairs to Sophia's room. He stopped at the door, observing the sleeping girl, his daughter. The words still sounded strange in his mind. Silently, he approached the bed, noticing an open notebook on the nightstand. It was the diary he had given Sophia the week before. The open page showed a drawing, 3 stick figures, a small one, a tall one with a hat, and another tall one with what appeared to be long hair. Underneath, written in childish handwriting, "My new family, me, Robert, and maybe a mum someday." The emotion hit him with full force. Tears that Robert didn't know he was still capable of shedding ran down his face. He carefully moved away and returned to his study. Emily's photograph stared at him from the frame. Robert made a decision. "Gerald," he called over the intercom, "contact Marcus. I need him to come immediately." Marcus Wright was the best private investigator in the country and had worked for Robert for years in the search for Emily. 2 hours later, the two men were talking privately in the study. "Understand, Robert," said Marcus, after hearing the whole story. "We investigated exhaustively at the time. If Emily was pregnant, but she was. The test doesn't lie. Sophia is my daughter." Marcus sighed, running his hand through his graying hair. "This changes everything. We need to reopen the investigation." With a new perspective, he paused. "You mentioned that the shelter where Sophia was staying is in Highland Fields. It's a small town, about 200 kilometers from here. You think Emily might have gone there?" "It's a possibility. And there's something else that always bothered me about this story." Marcus opened his folder. "Richard Myers. My former partner? What does he have to do with this?" "At the time I dismissed it as coincidence, but Richard left the company and moved abroad exactly 3 weeks after Emily's disappearance." Robert frowned. "Richard and I had disagreements, but to be involved in Emily's disappearance, perhaps it's worth investigating again, especially because," Marcus consulted his notes, "he returned to the US 5 years ago and established residence precisely in Highland Fields." Robert felt a shiver run down his spine. "I want everything about him, and about the shelter where Sophia was staying. Interview everyone who had contact with her there." "And what about the girl?" asked Marcus. "Do you intend to tell her?" Robert hesitated. "Not yet. Sophia is going through a difficult treatment. I don't want to overwhelm her with this right now." The next day, Sophia woke up more energetic. The new medication protocol was beginning to show results, although she still had good days and bad days. "Look what I drew for you," she said, handing Robert a sheet of paper as they had breakfast in the garden. The drawing showed the mansion with Robert and Sophia holding hands in front of it. "It's beautiful, Sophia," he replied, his voice choked. "Are you sad?" asked the girl, perceptive as always. "No, I'm not sad, just emotional." Sophia tilted her head, studying him. "You've been different since yesterday." "Have I?" "Yes, you look at me differently." Robert swallowed hard. It was true. How could he look at her the same way now that he knew the truth? "Sophia, do you remember anything about your mother?" The question caught the girl by surprise. "Why do you want to know that?" "Just curiosity." Sophia fidgeted with her cereal for a moment. "Not much. I remember a soft voice singing to me. A smell of vanilla." She shrugged. "The aunts at the shelter said she got sick when I was very small, that I stayed with a lady for a while, then went to the shelter when I was 5 years old." "Did no one ever mention your father?" Sophia lowered her eyes. Once I asked Aunt Helen at the shelter. She said my mother never talked about him, that maybe he didn't know I existed. She raised her gaze, a spark of hope quickly suppressed. For a long time I imagined that one day he might find me. But then I understood that some people simply don't have parents. Robert felt as if each word was a knife in his heart. Sophia. The phone rang, interrupting him. It was Marcus. I need to take this, it's important, said Robert, stepping away a few paces. Robert, I found something, Sophia's entry record at the shelter. It was signed by a woman named Claire Olson, who identified herself as a family friend. She's still alive, still lives in Highland Fields, and most importantly, she has a photo on her social media with Richard Myers at a charity event last year. Robert felt his blood freeze in his veins. I'm heading there today, he decided, hanging up the phone. Upon returning to the table, he found Sophia observing him with curiosity. Did something happen? I need to make a quick trip for business. Robert tried to smile naturally. I'll be back tomorrow night. Do you promise? I promise, Sophia. And when I return, we might have a lot to talk about. Claire Olson's small house on the outskirts of Highland Fields was modest but well kept. Robert felt strangely nervous as he waited in the simple living room, decorated with family photos and small handcrafted ornaments. Would you like more coffee, Mr. Mitchell? Offered Claire, a woman of about 60 with grey hair and a gentle expression. No, thank you. Robert leaned slightly forward. Mrs. Olson, thank you for receiving me without prior notice. As I mentioned, I'm interested in knowing more about Sophia. Claire settled into her armchair, studying Robert with a penetrating gaze. You said you're her legal guardian now. How is she? She's in treatment, a new protocol in Denver that has shown good initial results. The relief on Claire's face was visible. Thank God, that girl deserves a chance. She sighed deeply. You know, I always knew this day would come. Robert frowned. What day? The day Sophia's father would appear. Claire smiled softly upon seeing Robert's surprised expression. Yes, Mr. Mitchell, I know exactly who you are. I've seen your photos in the newspapers many times. You have the same eyes as her. Robert felt his heart accelerate. So you knew about me, about Sophia being my daughter? Emily told me everything. The name fell like a bomb in the silent room. You knew Emily? She was here? Robert could barely control his voice. Claire nodded, getting up to fetch a wooden box from a shelf. From it, she removed a faded photograph that she handed to Robert. In it, a visibly pregnant Emily smiled alongside a younger Claire. She arrived here almost 11 years ago, 7 months pregnant, scared and alone. We had met years before when I worked as a nurse in Denver. She asked for shelter and secrecy. Robert studied the photo with trembling hands. Why did she run away? Why did she never tell me about the pregnancy? Claire sighed heavily. It wasn't her choice, Mr. Mitchell. Emily was threatened, manipulated. By whom? By Richard Myers. The name came out like poison from Claire's lips. He came to her with proof that you had other relationships, that you would never acknowledge a child. He said that if she told you about the pregnancy, he would ruin your career, your reputation. Worse still, he threatened to harm the child. Robert felt a wave of fury like he had never experienced before. Richard? My own partner? Emily discovered later that he wanted to get her away because he had plans to embezzle money from the company. He knew she suspected his activities and could alert you. Robert stood up, unable to contain his agitation. And why did she never come back? After Sophia was born, Claire's expression changed, becoming sorrowful. She tried, Mr. Mitchell. When Sophia was almost 2 years old, Emily gathered courage. She discovered that Richard had stolen millions and fled abroad. She thought it was safe to look for you to tell the truth. And what happened? Claire lowered her eyes. She never reached you. She had an accident on the road, on her way to Denver. The woman's voice faltered. Wet road, poor visibility. The car rolled over several times. Robert felt his legs weaken and sat back down. Emily? Did she? She didn't survive her injuries. Claire held Robert's hand. "I'm so sorry. So very sorry." Silent tears ran down Robert's face. Emily had been gone for 8 years and he didn't even know, searching for her in vain while she was no longer in the world of the living. And Sophia? She was with a babysitter the day of the accident. I kept her for 3 years until my health deteriorated. I could no longer properly care for a child. That's when... Claire hesitated. When she went to the shelter. Robert completed, finally, understanding the whole story. I visited whenever I could, but when Sophia got sick, the shelter didn't have enough resources. I tried to contact you several times. Robert stared at her, surprised. I never received any contact. All my letters were returned, my phone calls blocked. Now I understand. That someone didn't want this connection to be made. Richard, murmured Robert. He returned to the US 5 years ago. He must have monitored the situation from a distance. I'm afraid of him, Mr. Mitchell. When I heard you were asking about Sophia in town, I decided to tell you everything. But Richard is a dangerous man with a lot of influence here. Robert stood up, determined. Where can I find him? Are you... Sure, that's sensible. Perhaps you should contact the police. I want to look into the eyes of the man who destroyed my family, who kept my daughter away from me for 10 years, who allowed her to go through all this alone. Claire hesitated, but finally gave in. He has a ranch on the outskirts of town. He's holding a charity event there tonight, an irony considering everything he's done. Before leaving, Robert asked one last question. Claire, did she leave anything for Sophia? Any letter? Any object? The woman smiled sadly. A locket. Sophia always wore it until she had to remove it for the hospital treatments. I promised to keep it for her. Claire stood up and took a small box from a drawer. It's here. I believe now it should stay with you. Robert opened the box. Inside was a delicate silver locket. Upon opening it, he found a tiny photograph. Him and Emily, smiling, in happier times. She never stopped loving you, said Claire, softly, and she wanted Sophia to know who her father was when the right time came. Robert closed the locket, putting it in his pocket. Thank you, Claire, for everything you did for them. Now, I have a meeting with the past. The Highland Ranch was resplendent with lights and sophisticated decorations. Luxury cars lined the entrance, while guests in formal attire circulated through the large hall transformed for the charity event. Robert observed everything from a distance, waiting for the right moment to enter. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Gerald. Sophia is well. She asked again when you'll be back. What should I tell? Her, Robert replied quickly. Tell her I'll be home tomorrow without fail, and that I have a surprise for her. Putting away his cell phone, Robert adjusted his jacket and headed to the entrance of the ranch. He hadn't been invited, but his name still opened doors. Robert Mitchell, exclaimed the receptionist, genuinely surprised. You weren't on the list, but certainly... Please, come in. The hall was filled with the local elite. Robert scanned the environment until he located his target, Richard Myers, elegantly dressed in a grey suit, animatedly conversing with a group of businessmen. At 58, he maintained the same arrogant posture that Robert remembered. Breathing deeply to control the anger boiling within him, Robert approached slowly. An impressive party, Richard. Robert's voice made Richard's smile freeze. Turning slowly, the man faced his former partner with a mixture of shock and apprehension quickly masked. Robert, what an unexpected surprise. I didn't know you frequented events in our small highland. Fields, I have pending matters in the region, matters that you know very well. Richard smiled nervously at the other guests. If you'll excuse me, I need to speak with my former partner. Business, you understand. When they moved to a more private corner of the hall, Richard's expression changed completely. What are you doing here, Robert? I thought our paths had definitively separated, just as you thought I would never discover about Sophia, about Emily. The name had the expected effect. Richard visibly paled, his gaze nervously scanning the hall. I don't know what you're talking about. I just spoke with Claire Olson. I know everything, Richard. How you threatened Emily, how you forced her to flee while pregnant, how you blocked all contact attempts afterward. Robert moved closer, his voice low and threatening. I know that you let my daughter grow up in a shelter, sick, while you flaunted your stolen wealth. Richard swallowed hard but maintained his composure. This is absurd. Claire is a confused old woman, always making up stories. You can't prove anything. I didn't come here to prove. I came to inform. Robert smiled coldly. My lawyers are at this moment gathering evidence. Embezzlement, manipulation, obstruction of justice. Not to mention your indirect participation in what happened to Emily. I had nothing to do with the accident, Richard let slip, immediately realizing his mistake. So you admit the rest? Richard looked around, checking if anyone was watching. Them. Let's talk outside. In the ranch's garden, away from the guests' ears, Richard finally dropped the mask. What do you want, Robert? Money? I can reimburse every cent I took from the company with interest. I don't want your money. I want justice, Richard laughed bitterly. Justice after 10 years? Be realistic. There's no way to prove half of what Claire told you. It will be your word against mine. Even so, your reputation will be destroyed just with the suspicions, your charity, your role as a local benefactor. All finished. Robert paused. Unless. I want a complete confession. In writing, recorded, everything you did to separate Emily from me, to keep Sophia hidden all these years. Richard ran his hand through his graying hair, visibly disturbed. And in return, I won't file a complaint for the financial embezzlement, just for the rest. That still means prison. Probably. But with good lawyers and your voluntary confession, maybe just a few years. The alternative is to face charges for financial crimes as well, which would double your sentence. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Finally, Richard spoke. Why are you doing this now? Why not move on? Keep the girl and leave me in peace? Robert felt the anger resurge with full force. Because while you enjoyed the life of luxury you built with stolen money, Sophia grew up alone. Because while you were giving your charity parties, my daughter was fighting against a disease that could have taken her without me ever knowing of her existence. Robert's voice trembled. Because Emily never had the chance to explain, to tell me the truth. Richard averted his gaze. I never intended for Emily to be gone. It was just business. You were getting too close to the truth about the embezzlement. And she suspected me. I needed to get her away. At least you'll pay for that. Robert turned his back, ready to leave. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow to collect your confession, or the press will receive the whole story on Monday. Robert, Richard called when he was already walking away. Wait, there's something you should know. Robert stopped without turning around. What? About Sophia's illness. It's not just coincidence. Slowly, Robert turned around. What do you mean? The chemical products factory in the southern region of Highland Fields. I'm one of the investors. There were leaks, contamination of the groundwater, several cancer cases in the region, especially among children. Robert felt his blood freeze. You knew about this, and even so, the reports only arrived last year. We tried to cover up the case, compensate the families quietly. But not Sophia. Richard lowered his eyes. I didn't know she was your daughter, and if I had sought to help her specifically, it could have raised suspicions. So I just ignored it. The silence that followed was heavier than all the previous words. Robert had to contain the impulse to lunge at Richard. Tomorrow, 9 o'clock, at the office of Attorney Fields. You'll have the chance to do one right thing in your life, Richard. Don't waste it. During the entire way back to the hotel, Robert struggled with a storm of emotions, anger, pain, guilt, but above all, a renewed determination, not only to seek justice for the past, but to ensure Sophia's future, his daughter, Emily's daughter. The last and most precious legacy of the love that never really died. The return journey seemed endless to Robert. In his pocket, Emily's locket weighed like lead, a constant reminder of all he had lost and miraculously found. In the back seat of the car, a box containing the few personal belongings of Emily that Claire had kept all these years, some photos, letters never sent, and a diary. During the night at the hotel, Robert had read every page of that diary. Emily's words, her confusion, her fear, and especially her immense love for both him and the daughter growing in her womb. The last entry, written a few weeks before the accident, was particularly painful. Sophia smiled today in a way that reminded me so much of Robert. I've made my decision. I can't live in this lie anymore. Richard is far away now. He can no longer threaten us. It's time to return to Denver, to show Robert his daughter. Even if he doesn't forgive me for leaving without explanations, I'm sure he'll love Sophia the moment he sees her. How could he not love her? She's the best part of both of us. Robert wiped away the tears that insisted on falling. Emily had never abandoned him willingly. She had always planned to return. And now, more than ever, he needed to honor that intention, that final wish of hers. Upon arriving home, it was already past 9 at night. Gerald received him at the door with a worried expression. "Sir, good that you're back. Sophia had a difficult day." Robert felt his heart tighten. What happened? High fever during the afternoon. Dr. Helen came to examine her and adjusted the medication. She's better now, but very anxious about your absence. Without wasting more time, Robert climbed the stairs to Sophia's room. He knocked softly on the door before entering. "May I?" Sophia was sitting on the bed, leafing through a book. Upon seeing him, her eyes lit up. "Robert, you came back." He approached, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I promised I would return, didn't I?" "Yes, but—" She hesitated. Sometimes adults promise things and don't fulfill them. The pain in those words was palpable. How many unfulfilled promises had that child already collected in her short life? "Sophia, I need to tell you something. Several things, actually." Robert took a deep breath. "But first, how are you feeling?" "Better. Now, I had a fever, but Dr. Helen said that's normal during the treatment." Sophia studied Robert's face attentively. "You look different. Did something happen on your trip?" Robert smiled. The girl's perceptiveness never ceased to amaze him. "Yes, it did. I discovered some very important truths." He hesitated, uncertain about how to proceed. "Sophia, do you remember when you asked me about the person I lost? About Emily?" Sophia nodded. "The woman in the photo you keep in your study?" "Exactly." Robert took the locket from his pocket. "I found this. It belonged to your mother." Sophia's eyes widened. "My locket. Aunt Claire promised she would keep it for me." She took it with trembling hands. "How did you get it?" "I met Claire. I talked with her about you, about your mother." Sophia opened the locket, revealing the small photograph. Her fingers touched the image gently. "This is my mother with a man. I never could see clearly who it was." "It's me, Sophia." The girl raised her eyes, confused. "You? But how? Did you know my mother?" Robert held Sophia's hands in his. "Sophia, Emily wasn't just the woman I loved. She was your mother, and that means that you're my father." Sophia's voice was just a whisper. "Yes, Sophia, I'm your father." A dense silence filled the room. Sophia stared at Robert, her eyes reflecting a storm of emotions. Confusion, disbelief, hope, and finally, hurt. "If you're my father, why did you never look for me? Why did you leave me alone in the shelter?" Her voice trembled. Robert felt the words like stabs. "I didn't know you existed, Sophia, your mother. She was forced to leave without telling me about the pregnancy. A bad man threatened her, made her believe that I didn't want her or you." "What man?" "Someone who worked with me and wanted to hide his crimes. He kept you two away from me for years." Sophia lowered her gaze to the locket in her hands. "And my mother. Why did she never come back?" The question Robert dreaded. How to explain to a 10-year-old child that her mother had died trying to take her back to her father? "Your mother tried to come back. Sophia, she wanted us to meet, but there was an accident when you were almost 2 years old." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She didn't survive her injuries." Silent tears ran down Sophia's face. So she didn't abandon me on purpose. Never. She loved you more than anything in the world. Robert opened the box he had brought. Here are things of hers, including a diary where she wrote about you every day. Sophia took the diary with reverence, slowly leafing through the pages, as if touching something precious. She wrote all this about me. Yes, about how you were special from the first moment, about how she sang to you every night. Robert hesitated before continuing. And about how she planned to reunite us, to be a family. But then, Sophia closed the diary, her expression slowly transforming. That means that you really are my father? Yes, Sophia, I'm your father. Robert felt his voice falter. And if I had known about you, I would have moved mountains to find you. Never ever would I have allowed you to grow up alone. Sophia remained silent for several minutes, processing everything she had just heard. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost a whisper. What happens now? Now. Robert smiled softly. Now we continue what we've already started, taking care of each other, fighting for your treatment. But with one difference. Now we know who we really are. And if the treatment doesn't work? Asked Sophia, verbalizing the fear that both carried. It will work. I have to believe that. Robert adjusted the blanket over the girl's legs, and while we fight, we recover the lost time. Do you want that? Sophia studied him for a long time, her eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. I always wanted a father, she finally said. On nights at the shelter, I imagined what he would be like, what his voice would sound like. A small smile appeared on her lips. I never imagined it would be someone I already know, someone I already... Already what? Encouraged Robert when she hesitated. Already like, completed Sophia, blushing slightly. Robert felt his heart overflow with emotion. Can we start over? He asked, extending his hand. Hello, I'm Robert Mitchell, your father. 6 months had passed since the night of revelations. The mansion, once silent and somber, now pulsed with new energy. Sophia's room, initially decorated impersonally, had transformed into a truly personal space, with walls covered in drawings, shelves full of books and toys, and a large aquarium where colorful fish swam peacefully. Robert observed his daughter through the half-open door. Sophia was sitting on the room's veranda, concentrating on her drawing notebook, the late afternoon sun rays illuminating her hair, now longer after so many months of treatment. May I come in? He asked softly. Sophia raised her eyes and smiled. That smile that still surprised Robert every time he saw it, a smile so similar to Emily's. I'm drawing our family, she said, showing the notebook. On the paper, 3 figures, Sophia in the middle, Robert at her side, and an ethereal, almost transparent female figure hovering over them. Mom is always with us, isn't she? Commented Sophia, with a wisdom that frequently astonished Robert. Yes, she is. He sat down beside her. How are you feeling today? Good. No nausea since yesterday. Dr. Helen said the results are improving. The last few months had been a roller coaster. The experimental treatment, although promising, subjected Sophia to intense periods of side effects. There were days when hope seemed distant, when exhaustion took over not just Sophia but also Robert. However, slowly, results began to appear. I have 2 pieces of news, announced Robert. First, Richard Myers has been formally charged. The trial begins next month. Sophia nodded seriously. Robert had explained the situation in an age-appropriate way, sharing only what was necessary for her to understand why they had been separated for so long. Will he go to prison? Probably yes. His confession helped, but the crimes are serious. Robert paused. And the financial compensation for what happened in Highland Fields is already being used to treat other affected children. Sophia smiled, approving. And the second news. Robert took a deep breath. Dr. Helen called. The latest tests. He hesitated. Emotional. Sophia, the treatment is working better than we expected. The remission is advancing. The girl's eyes widened. That means it means we're winning. One step at a time, but we're winning. Sophia dropped the notebook and jumped into her father's arms, hugging him with all the strength her small body allowed. Robert embraced her carefully, still conscious of her fragility, but marveling at the growing energy she demonstrated each day. "Let's celebrate," exclaimed Sophia. "Can we have a picnic in the garden, with everything I like?" "Everything? Really? Even that mint chocolate ice cream that Gerald disapproves of?" "Especially that," laughed Sophia. Later, while Sophia slept peacefully in her room, Robert remained on the veranda, observing the stars. Emily's locket, now worn daily by Sophia, temporarily rested on the girl's bedside table. Robert felt at peace in a way he didn't believe was possible again. The sound of soft footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Claire Olson, who had moved to Denver at Robert's invitation to be closer to Sophia, approached with 2 cups of tea. "I thought you might want company," she said, handing him one of the cups. "Always welcome." Robert smiled at the woman who had become a sort of grandmother to Sophia and a valuable friend to him. Sophia finally fell asleep? Yes, exhausted after all that celebration. Claire sat in the chair beside him. "Today's new. It's wonderful, Robert. We still have a long road ahead. The treatment needs to continue, the remission needs to be complete. But it's hope, real, tangible." Claire gently touched his arm. "You gave her that. Not just the treatment, but the will to fight." Robert shook his head. "She's the one who gave that to me. Before Sophia, I simply existed, Claire. I didn't truly live." They remained silent for a few minutes, contemplating the starry sky. "You know what Sophia asked me today?" Claire finally said. "If, when she's completely cured, we can visit the place where Emily is resting." Robert felt a lump in his throat. "What did you answer?" "That it was a question for her father," Claire smiled gently, "but that I believed it would be a beautiful way to close a cycle and begin a new one." Robert reflected on this. For years, he hadn't had a place to mourn Emily, to say goodbye. Now the idea of visiting her grave with Sophia seemed not only appropriate but necessary. "We'll go when she's stronger. We'll bring flowers. Emily loved white lilies." "She'll like that." Claire looked toward Sophia's room door. "You know, Robert, I believe there are no coincidences. You finding Sophia that night in the rain, it was meant to happen." Robert smiled, remembering the moment that had changed his life forever. "Sometimes, when I watch her sleeping, I still wonder how I didn't immediately realize. The same eyes as Emily, the same smile. The time was right. Not before, not after." Claire stood up. "I'm going to rest now. Good night, Robert." "Good night, Claire, and thank you for everything." Alone again, Robert returned to contemplating the night sky. So much had changed in so little time. Pain had transformed into purpose, emptiness into fullness, loneliness into family. Sophia had taught him something precious, that love never really disappears. It transforms, finds new paths, new expressions. The love he had felt for Emily now lived in his love for Sophia, and in some mysterious way, Emily remained present through the daughter they had created together, even separated by time and distance. Tomorrow would be a new day. There would be more treatments, more challenges. Sophia's journey toward complete recovery would still be long and at times arduous. But now they had something that seemed impossible months ago. A future to plan, dreams to build, memories to create. Robert stood up, ready to retire, when a soft sound stopped him. Sophia was at the veranda door, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Just thinking a bit. And you, why did you wake up?" "I had a dream." Sophia approached, leaning against her father. "I dreamed of Mum. She was smiling in a garden full of flowers, and she said she was proud of both of us." Robert felt his eyes mist over. "That was a very beautiful dream." Sophia nodded, yawning. "Dad?" Robert's heart warmed as it happened whenever Sophia called him that. It was still a novelty for both, a word she used with growing naturalness. "Yes. I think we're finally complete now. We found each other." Robert hugged his daughter against his chest, feeling a deep certainty that, regardless of future challenges, they had really found what they had been searching for so long, a home not in a place but in each other. Yes, Sophia, we are complete, and we're going to be fine.